This is the memorial wall in central Kiev on Mikhailovsky Square. And it is where they have put portraitures of all those who have died fighting the Russians. And you'll notice that the date that they put on this first panel is back in 2014. And that is because for most Ukrainians, the war started back then. There is a history and a legacy to this war that exists well beyond last year's massive invasion. And the gentleman with whom I'll be having an interview today knows a good deal of that history. In fact, he was here for a whole bunch of it. I'll be speaking today with former Ambassador William Taylor. And Ambassador Taylor, now retired, was ambassador here in Kiev under the Bush and the Obama administrations, and then subsequently was also chargé d'affaires during the contentious period with President Trump. And I had interviewed Ambassador Taylor years and years ago, well over a decade, and it was nice to see him here recently back in Kiev. He was part of a delegation organized by the Renewed Democracy Initiative, an organization founded in part at least by the world-renowned chess grandmaster and outspoken Putin critic Garry Kasparov. Now, Kasparov himself didn't come here, probably for a variety of reasons. He's a Russian national. There are security concerns, political concerns. You know, if a major dissident showed up on Zelensky's doorstep, I'm not sure how that would play out. Anyhow, regardless, there was a large delegation of heavy hitters in the foreign affairs field, not least of which Ambassador Taylor, who was a juggernaut on the scene when it comes to these kind of matters. He was kind enough to give me a little bit of his time, and this is my interview with former Ambassador William Taylor. Bill, thank you for taking time, Mr. Ambassador. I don't know whichever you prefer.
Bill,
it's been a long time since I interviewed you, and a lot of water under the bridge. And so before I kind of move on to where we are and where we're going, I'd like to do a little quick recap because you were here at a really interesting time in that kind of post-2014 up until, of course, the full-scale war. And I used to equate what was going on here kind of like Casablanca was depicted, you know, with kind of very shady characters and a lot of different interests going on. Talk to me a little bit about that period where Russia and the Western powers and Ukraine were all still kind of in this mix when you were like chargé d'affaires in that kind of era.
So I was chargé d'affaires in 2019. I arrived here in June, just after President Zelensky was inaugurated. That summer, you remember, there was a snap parliamentary election. So the politics were in full swing. President Zelensky, of course, won an overwhelming victory in his presidential campaign. His party did very well in the parliamentary election. So it gave him the ability to start work on this plank of his campaign, which had to do with the war.
Right.
The war had been going on from 2014 to 2019. It's been going on for 5 years at that time. And he thought and campaigned on a expectation that he could end this war by talking to Putin.
Mm-hmm.
And he figured out, didn't take him long to figure out, that that wasn't going to happen. That President Putin was not going to agree to remove his troops, to pull the Russians out. So President Zelensky then looked to the West, looked to Europe, looked to the United States. And that was a very interesting time for the United States to be dealing, because this is still, you remember, this was still when President Trump was in office. President Zelensky was looking for support from the United States. And so the time here in 2019 was fascinating.
Yeah, I can imagine lots of people with a lot of fingers in different pies going on. Did you get an impression during that period that the Ukrainians Zelensky wanted to talk to Putin, but you say he quickly was disillusioned with that because it was certainly my impression that the Russians were never going to just make some sort of negotiated settlement and walk away and everything would be fine, that the aspirations and the desire to contain and control Ukraine were just too great. Did you get that impression as well?
Yeah, we didn't think that President Putin was going to negotiate in good faith. President Zelensky thought that he could bring President Putin to the table and have a conversation with him and agree. That was an idealistic, optimistic view. As I say, President Zelensky soon figured out that was not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And now we're standing here at the wall of all these dead this is 2014 and it goes on. This country is paying a massive cost. You've been here on this mission that you're currently on and you're talking to Ukrainians. And I living here know that Ukrainians are paying a very serious price for what is in your discussions with them. What impression do you get between the cost that they're bearing and their determination to be victorious in this war?
I have been amazed, impressed with the determination, the commitment of Ukrainians to victory, to winning this war. You're right, it's a high price, it's a terrible price. Every family is paying this price. Every region is paying this price. Every village is paying this price. But the commitment, the determination, the courage that Ukrainians are showing to win this war is inspiring to each other. It's inspiring to the allies, the friends, the partners that Ukraine has. And that's why we are here to demonstrate that support, to go back to Washington to encourage more support for Ukraine because of the Ukrainian people's passion for victory.
And I get the impression in being here, is that they don't just want to be another democracy. They want to be like a shining example of democracy, that they want to, having overthrown autocracy, really do all the essentials of what a liberal democracy, a Jeffersonian democracy is. Do you also get that impression? I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
I do get the sense that Ukrainians want their democracy to succeed. They first want to win the war. They first want to push the Russians out of the country. They want to be victorious. So after the victory, they want to be sure that they win the peace. They want to be sure that all the democratic processes on elections, on free media, are in full swing, fully obtained. All of those democratic processes, practices, institutions are important. What I hear from Ukrainians, they want their democracy to succeed. They don't want to live under autocracy. They don't want to live under the Russians. They want their democracy to succeed.
And rule of law and end of corruption and all the things that come with autocracy. I've heard it time and time again from Ukrainians.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you're hearing the same.
Absolutely. They don't want to live under Russia. They want to live under democracy, and that's what they're fighting for.
Right. And when you go back to the States, what message are you going to carry?
I'm going to carry the message that you and I just talked about. That is, the Ukrainians are committed to winning. We need to provide them, the Ukrainians, with everything they need to win. And that's the weapons, that's the finance, that's the budget support for the government. They need this to win, and that's what the message needs to be.
And what about this kind of growing, sneaking criticism of, in particular, U.S. Support for Ukraine? And we hear it from certain sectors, particularly, of course, from the GOP. What do you say to them and their open criticism of our support for Ukraine?
So the open criticism is coming from a small group of people. I don't know if we'll ever win over every person. We won't win over every person, but we Americans understand what Ukraine is about. Americans understand that Ukraine is a country that did nothing to merit. There was this invasion. That this is an unprovoked invasion. That the atrocities that the Russians have inflicted on the Ukrainians offend Americans. It's horrible what the Russians are doing to Ukrainians, and Americans hate that. So the American and the majority of American people will continue to support Ukraine, and that's what I'll be.
Further out, there are those who are convinced that this place is filled with Nazis and kleptocracy and oligarchs and all the rest. What do you say to them?
That's what Putin thinks, or that's what he says. If people want to believe President Putin over President Zelensky, over President Biden, over Senator McConnell, over the Republican leaders in the House, they all know what the truth is. And the truth is, this is a democracy here in Ukraine. It's being led by people who are committed to the same values that the Americans are. And that Putin is not to be believed.
And last question, where do we go? When you go back, you take the message to the Hill, you take the message to the Beltway, but what are you also going to advocate for what we need to do moving forward to support Ukraine?
First, Ukraine has to win this war. So we need to provide them with even more weapons than we've provided. Then we need to provide them, tell the world and tell Ukrainians they're going to be secure after the victory. That is, the Russians will not be able to invade again. That will enable reconstruction to take place. And that's what needs to happen. Ukraine will be a success. It'll take time, it'll take resources, but it's got the people to succeed.
Mr. Ambassador, I do really, truly appreciate the time, and it's lovely to see you again.
Good to see you.
Slava Ukraini,
Slava.
Geroyam Slava.